Hi guys, I just want to welcome you to my latest tutorial. This is a piece from the Endless Sky collection I've got coming up, and it's a galaxy themed painting. I've used a round canvas, but you could use a square or rectangle one if you prefer. We're going to be using some of my favourite techniques, which are layering colour on top of each other. So we start off by wetting the canvas. I've just used a spray bottle here. You could brush the water on, but I find it's easier and faster to use a spray bottle. Start by applying colours onto the canvas and then simply just blend them. You've noticed here I've started off with blue and green. So I have literally just put it straight onto the canvas in quite a thin layer, and you'll notice here I'm blending it out. In between each of these layers you want to ensure that they're dry. So to help you with that, a hairdryer is handy, and as you can see I'm using one here. So we now just wet the canvas each time we want to apply a layer of colour. For me, it's the best way, well, it's my favourite way of building layers of colour. I feel each one shines through beautifully from the last. You know, it just gives it that sort of lovely luminescent quality. So just keep building some layers. So wet, apply the paint, dry. And sure, you can blend as well as much as you prefer. You don't have to completely soften it. You can see here I've left some areas that are a little bit denser than others. I think it adds some interest perhaps later on, as we are filming here a space themed painting, so it gives it a little bit of texture later. Again, just start wetting your canvas and applying the colour. Here you can see I'm applying some purple. I chose purple and green and blue for this because I wanted it to have a sort of cool colour palette and keep it quite similar. So here I'm just applying the purple straight onto the green and the blue, ensuring that the green and the blue is dry, of course. So again, just onto a wet canvas, quite a nice thin layer, and it's really just a little bit of feeling here to gauge where to place the colour on the canvas. You can see I'm starting to build the shape of a Milky Way galaxy, and again just blend it out. You can see things are starting to get a little bit darker, which is what we want. We want to build the intensity of a night sky filled with stars. You'll also notice in this tutorial I don't use any black at all. I just build the darkness through the layers of the green, the blue and the purple. You can see that I'm starting to get things really dark, picking out areas that I feel would have that little bit more intensity, and then leaving the areas that I feel would be a little bit lighter in the Milky Way. I have used a reference photo for this, just a typical Milky Way one, but I have mixed up the colours a little bit and just kind of gone with my own feeling on it. You can do this, you can just simply copy one straight off, or just sort of go with your own feeling, which is what I always like to do. I think it's nice to have a bit of feeling in there. We moved on to a different section of the painting, not too far on, but you'll notice from the last segment I just kept adding in those darker areas. allowed that to dry completely, and have accented some of the areas with a tiny bit of white. We're now, once dry, moving into adding more purple. You'll notice I'm picking out areas next to the white light areas of the Milky Way. You'll notice when you look at photographs of it, there are those little areas that are dark right next to the light. And I think it adds that nice contrast. Again, just softening it out where you feel. We're now adding in more purple. Excuse me, got it wrong. Add more purple. It just gives it that little bit more texture. Again, it's just building layers of colour. You'll notice I'm applying more white to give the idea of an impression of more density of stars. Just using the same technique, allowing each layer to dry, spraying some water, and then going for it really. So just keep blending. So here we're adding in more white. But actually, I'll tell you what I did here. I didn't use white completely on its own. I mixed it with a little bit of the purple that I've been applying. I always think it looks nicer and not as stark. If you add pure bright white, it can be a little bit too much. I know it looks like some of those stars are pure white, but most of the time there's other colours in there. So that's a little tip for that section. So now it's completely dry. You can just use the hairdryer to dry it as well. This wasn't any period of time really that passed. Now I'm applying more purple. And again, you can see it's starting to take the shape more and more of the Milky Way galaxy. Just building those layers. I love these circles. It makes it look like a little planet, I think. I think I've been converted to circular canvases rather than squares. So keep building those stars. Here I'm picking out sections that are a little bit brighter in intensity for the stars. I usually do this with these Milky Way galaxies. When you look at a photograph, you'll notice there's always maybe one or two areas that shine the brightest. So I've picked an area kind of near the centre, but not too far, just to give it that extra oomph. And to add all those zillions of little stars, I use the same white with a tiny bit of purple mixture and just a toothbrush. It's a really great way just to instantly add a zillion stars to your painting. Now with a fine brush, I think it was just a spotter, we start picking out some of those toothbrush stars, sounds funny, that we've just applied in one go. You'll notice when you look at the night sky, you'll see the odd star just shine a little bit brighter than the rest. So at random, I'll just pick out a few little ones just to give them a little more presence in the painting. This section here, once everything is completely dried that we've just done, the painting that I wanted to create here, from the photograph that I used, I noticed that it had a lovely lilac lavender colour. So this piece here, in this little segment, we're adding in this lovely lilac lavender colour that I saw, and I slowed this little section down because I thought it would be quite nice just to give you a real-time approach as to how I did this. So this is onto wet again. And with the oval brush, I'm just brushing in little areas to accentuate the white. I think that's what I was wanting to achieve here. then just dry your layers off. Like I say, in between each one, just make sure it's completely dry before applying the next layer. I also want to point out you can use oil for this. I used a water-based oil. You could use acrylic or you could use normal oil. Obviously, if you're using normal oil, you would need a lot more drying time in between each layer. For glazing, probably the best way is to use an acrylic. It'll be the fastest and will give you those results instantly. So completely dried, we're just proceeding with adding more colour. You'll notice that I just keep adding layers, and it's how I like to build up subtly the colours in the piece. I did end up softening out some of those white areas just to ensure that the patches were a little bit bigger than I had anticipated. You'll notice also I've glazed over some of those toothbrush stars because I notice in skies when you look at them that they do have areas that have a little bit more. They're not completely bright stars, there's different intensities. Did actually want to make my lighter areas a little bit brighter. So you'll notice here I'm going back over and adding in more of a section over on the left hand side of the painting. Quite often this happens to me. I'll change something a little bit when look at it again. Especially a lot of my work is painting as I go. So I don't really ever completely plan the piece. So things do change a little bit as I go. And I think it's nice to allow for this. Moving into adding more purple. I notice I love purple. You'll see it in a lot of my paintings. So again, as I mentioned earlier, when you look at a picture of the Milky Way, you notice that there's areas next to the white and lighter areas that are quite dark. So I'm trying to achieve that look here by putting the purple straight up next to the white. I'm now repainting in some of those whiter areas just to give them a little bit more intensity. You'll notice that I made the whole of the main Milky Way white star section a little bit bigger. I'm bringing it out towards the right hand side as well. I noticed that I just felt like it needed a little bit more movement across the canvas. Again with the toothbrush, just to give more layers of interest to the painting, just add some more straight over the top of these layers. So all the little stars from before will also shine through from underneath. So just go for it really and get that toothbrush out. Again, I'm picking out some little areas just to give it a bit more interest. Those little stars that I'd picked out before, just going over a couple of those and adding in some new ones also. For this little section, I wanted to go back and just add in some more of that lovely lilac lavender colour. The layers sometimes dry a little bit darker, and I wanted to just go back and add in a little bit more just to make sure that it was there in the painting. It's like I say, I loved this from the photograph that I chose. So I'm just going back over all those little areas with that lilac, and it really is just the same colour, just mixed with more white. It's a good way to harmonise your paintings using the same purples, or sorry, your base colour. So for this I'm using quite a lot of purple, but the same lilac is for this brightest section of stars. I've just mixed more white with it. So everything kind of harmonises and matches. It's the same exact purple. I will be discussing in another video exactly how I colour mix. I usually mix all my colours before I start the painting, so that'll be one of my next tutorials coming up. Just ensuring things are dry before continuing with the rest of the painting. Excuse me. So everything's dry, and you can see it really is starting to look a lot like a little Milky Way place. I'm pointing out that that's more of that purple. I just want to make sure that I'm adding in. So I've dried off the previous layer we just did, and this is straight onto another layer just to build that intensity. This is the thing about when you look at the Milky Way or a galaxy photograph, you'll notice that there's so many areas of different colour and tone. So this is what I'm trying to achieve, just building up a little bit more of that lilac, just to give it as much interest as I possibly can. So again, dry it off, wet the canvas, and then I'm applying the colour just to let it flow a little bit. I'm not blending it as much here, I'm just letting it sit. So kind of like a bit like a watercolory effect, the paint moves a little bit, and I just left that in. If there's any areas you don't like, do the same as I did. You can just dab them out with a little tissue or some kitchen roll. If you feel like it's just a little bit too much, you can just remove it quite easily. So we just keep building with that lilac. I'm still using that lilac colour. I want to take it right to the edge just to give that feeling of the Milky Way sweeping across the painting, across the canvas, somewhat like what it would in the night sky. Just softening things a little bit if I feel it needs that. but I want to take it right out to the edge and right up to the top edge, just to give it that feeling, like I say, of sweeping and movement. For the next area of this painting, we're going to work on the water. Now, you could use some tape. I'm using here just an old ruler. It's just a metal ruler that I've always had, just to get the straight line of the water at the horizon. It's really up to you what you would prefer. I actually didn't have the right tape, so I chose just to use my ruler, and it really is just a case of marking it, spraying some water, and getting that glossy sort of sheen. Just apply the layers of colour, somewhat like what we did with the sky, and blend it more in a straight line, so across and down, just to give it that feeling of water, a deep edge. And I literally have just used the same lilac at the horizon with a little bit more white in, just at the centre to match the white where the Milky Way stars are. And I just keep building the colour. I'm using exactly the same technique. Spray some and then paint, blend and then dry. You'll notice I just dried that off. I've just applied some more water and now we're adding some more colour, and I'm using the same colours that I used for the sky, building this intensity just the same way. So we're using the purple and the green and the blue and the lilac at the lighter areas. It looks like I've spent hours perhaps doing this, but it really is quite a simple, easy little thing to do. So once these layers are dry, like I say, just keep applying some colour, just building up the depth and intensity. You'll notice when you look at the ocean, some of the sections nearest to you are darker and it gets lighter as you go further off into the distance. So this is the look I'm trying to achieve here. So I'll just keep building a little bit darker around the bottom edge. Now we want to start adding in some of the reflections. You'll notice in these paintings we're just simply just picking out a little area. Pretty much it doesn't have to be mathematically accurate to where exactly a reflection would be. It really is just to give it a sort of feeling of a reflection. So I'm just picking out little areas and using that white lilac just to match where the stars are, picking out perhaps the main areas of the concentrated stars and then just matching them in the water with brush strokes down. And I quite often put a few little stars in the ocean as well, just to kind of mirror the sky above it. So you can use your toothbrush, the splatter technique we discussed, and then just pick out some little areas to match the sky. And that really is it, guys. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. And on to the next one. Any questions, just ask.